A United States aircraft carrier just took combat damage in the Persian Gulf. Washington is calling it limited while insisting nothing has changed. Read that again and let it land. A superpower just absorbed a direct hit and pretended it was routine. And that tells you everything about how badly this war is going. Let me be direct about what this means. When an American carrier is damaged in a live combat theater, the war has crossed a line that no amount of press briefings can erase. I have been in and around the American military for my entire adult life, and I want to be precise about this point. Aircraft carriers are not symbols. They are strategic instruments whose survivability underwrites the entire U.S. posture abroad. When one is hit, not sunk, not disabled, but damage deterrence has already failed. The enemy has demonstrated reach, accuracy, and the will to escalate. Everything after that is damage control, not strategy. The official narrative today insists this was a non-catastrophic incident, that flight operations continue, that escorts performed as designed. That language is designed to anesthetize the public. Operational reality is different. The carrier strike group was forced to maneuver defensively. Air operations were disrupted. Escorts expended interceptors at a rate that cannot be sustained. And most importantly, Iranian commanders now know something they did not know before. They can put steel on a U.S. carrier deck in wartime conditions. That is not a talking point. That is a strategic fact. Now let's strip away the slogans and examine how we got here. This war began with the decision to strike Iran while diplomatic negotiations were still ongoing, despite Iran's agreement to full verification and no stockpiling of enriched uranium. Washington chose force first and explanation later. On day one, Iran's supreme leader was assassinated, a political act masquerading as military necessity. The regime did not collapse, it consolidated. Mojtaba Khamenei took power, the security services closed ranks, and Iran transitioned immediately to a regional war of attrition. Since then, Iran has launched more than 70 waves of retaliatory strikes across 9 countries. Oil infrastructure has been hit. LNG capacity critical to global supply has been degraded for half a decade. Ballistic missiles flew 4,000 kilometers to Diego Garcia, shattering the illusion that distance equals safety. Missiles struck Dimona, Israel's nuclear city, forcing international inspectors to acknowledge what everyone already knew. And through all of this, Iranian commanders have repeatedly stated they are fighting with decade-old inventory. Read that again and let it land. They have not escalated to their newest systems. Against that backdrop, the damage to a U.S. carrier is not an isolated incident. It is the logical outcome of a campaign built on fantasy. Washington assumed escalation dominance without asking whether the other side accepted the same rules. Iran does not fight the way we do. It does not seek a decisive battle at sea. It seeks cumulative pressure, political fracture, and economic pain. Every missile that flies is meant to remind allies and adversaries alike that American power has limits. That is not an accident. That is design. I want to be precise about the military balance. The United States Navy remains formidable, but it is stretched thin. Carrier strike groups are optimized for power projection against weaker opponents, not for sustained operations under dense missile threat inside confined waters. The Persian Gulf is not the open Pacific. It is a kill box. Iran has spent decades preparing for this fight, dispersing launchers, hardening facilities, integrating sensors, and practicing saturation attacks. When Washington talks about freedom of navigation, Iran hears predictable routes. So what does this carrier damage actually tell us? It tells us that the theory of the war has collapsed. The theory said limited strikes would coerce Iran. Instead, Iran expanded the battle space. The theory said allies would rally. Instead, Europe refused to reopen the strait. China negotiated its own access, and American ships found themselves isolated. The theory said economic pressure would force restraint. Instead, oil prices surged, diesel approached $5 a gallon, and Washington waived domestic shipping laws in a quiet admission of emergency. That is not strategy. That is improvisation under fire. Let's talk about costs. Because the American people deserve to know. More than 2,400 people are dead across 14 countries. Lebanon bleeds again, with children buried under rubble and entire communities displaced. 20 Americans are dead in a war Congress never authorized. The bill approaches $24 billion and counting, unbudgeted, borrowed, and invisible in press conferences. Gas prices rise, supply chains tighten, and families pay the price for decisions made by people who will never stand watch on a deck at night. Now consider the global dimension. While Washington insists it is degrading Iranian capabilities, Russia and China are watching closely and learning. They see that missile salvos strain interceptor inventories. They see that regional allies hesitate when costs rise. They see that political unity in Washington fractures under pressure, and they draw conclusions. This war is not isolating Iran. It is accelerating a shift away from American-centric security guarantees. Meanwhile, the political class pretends escalation is optional. It is not. Once a carrier is damaged, the ladder narrows. Every response carries risk. Strike harder and invite wider retaliation. Pull back and signal weakness. Stay the course and bleed slowly. None of those options resemble the clean, decisive outcomes promised at the outset. We have seen this movie before. In Korea, we escalated without clear limits and paid in stalemate. In Vietnam, we measured success in sorties while losing the war politically. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we mistook tactical dominance for strategic victory and watched regimes crumble only to be replaced by chaos. This war follows the same pattern. Tactical actions substitute for strategy, metrics substitute for thinking, and truth is postponed until the bill comes due. Let me be blunt about Israel's role, because honesty matters. Israeli strikes expanded targets without coordination, including energy infrastructure whose destruction reverberated globally. Intelligence failures inside Israel itself now surface, with espionage and compromised defenses exposed, yet Washington absorbs the blowback. American sailors face the missiles. American consumers pay at the pump. American credibility erodes with every contradiction between rhetoric and reality. So where does this go? Iran threatens to mine the entire Gulf. Even partial execution would paralyze trade. Insurance rates would skyrocket. Energy markets would convulse. The U.S. Navy could clear mines, but not quickly, not without losses, and not without further escalation. And remember, Iran still holds newer capabilities in reserve. They have been signaling restraint, not weakness. That distinction matters. Military degradation is not political defeat. Iran can absorb strikes and still achieve its strategic aims if it fractures alliances, reshapes trade flows, and convinces the region that American protection is conditional and costly. From Tehran's perspective, damaging a carrier without triggering all-out war is a success. It demonstrates reach, imposes caution, and forces Washington into a reactive posture. Now ask yourself the question Washington avoids. What is the end state? Is it regime change? That failed elsewhere and would require ground forces no one is willing to deploy. Is it deterrence? That already failed the moment missiles flew freely. Is it containment? That presumes partners willing to bear the cost, which they clearly are not. Or is it simply to avoid admitting error long enough to pass responsibility to someone else? The American people deserve to know the answer because they are paying for this war in blood, in dollars, and in credibility. They deserve leaders who can distinguish between bravado and strategy, between motion and progress. A damaged carrier is not just a tactical incident. It is a warning flare. The unanswered question is simple and devastating. If a war that began without congressional authorization, without clear objectives, and without allied unity can now damage a U.S. aircraft carrier, how exactly does Washington intend to end it, and at what price?